The stellar assembly chamber was, by any reasonable standard, an architectural marvel that screamed, "We're very important, and you should be impressed." Crystalline spires twisted toward a domed ceiling that displayed real-time feeds from 1,000 worlds, while representatives from dozens of species sat in perfectly arranged semicircles that somehow managed to look both dignified and completely ridiculous. Ambassador Keflix floated 3 feet above their assigned platform, because, of course, the Velthari had to be different, reviewing the tablet that would either grant humanity protected status or condemn them to another decade of bureaucratic limbo. The irony wasn't lost on them that a species barely 200 years into space travel was asking for protection from the same assembly that had been debating trade regulations for longer than humans had been using fire. "The application before us today," Keflix announced, their voice carrying that particular mix of authority and boredom that only career diplomats could master, "concerns the recently contacted species designation. Human. Classification request. Protected juvenile status. Subcategory research and cultural exchange." A ripple of what might generously be called interest passed through the chamber. Mostly, it was the kind of attention one gives to a particularly entertaining pet video. General Thekmore, whose species had been conquering star systems when humans were still figuring out agriculture, leaned forward with the sort of paternal smile that made smart people check their wallets. "Ah, yes, the humans. Delightful little creatures, aren't they? So enthusiastic about everything." Captain Holly sat in the observation gallery, her jaw clenched tight enough to crack walnuts. She'd volunteered for this diplomatic mission with the naive hope that maybe, just maybe, someone in this cosmic circus would take humanity seriously. Instead, she was watching her entire species get discussed like they were applying for zoo membership. The holographic display flickered to life, showing humanity's compiled achievements: first moon landing, space stations, faster-than-light travel, early terraforming projects. Impressive stuff if you were grading on the curve of a species that had only recently stopped hitting things with rocks. "Their technological advancement is adequate," continued Keflix, managing to make adequate sound like high praise. However, psychological profiles indicate classic juvenile species markers: excessive emotional responses, pack bonding behaviors, and an alarming tendency toward what they term creative problem-solving. Holly bit back a snort. Creative problem-solving. Right. Like that time humans had jury-rigged a lunar module with duct tape and spare parts to save 3 astronauts, or when they'd turned a failed space mission into the greatest rescue operation in their short history. Definitely signs of immaturity. "Their combat capabilities?" asked Counselor Vexara, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence, a Naxilian gesture that Holly had learned meant either deep thought or mild indigestion. "Minimal," Thekmore replied with a wave of his massive hand. "They're still using kinetic weapons and chemical propulsion. Their military doctrine appears to be based on, what do they call it? Improvisation, and adapt and overcome. Very primitive thinking." The general's aide, a younger Velthari named Keltos, pulled up additional data. Their largest military engagements involved fewer than 1 million combatants. Compare this to the War of the Spiral Nebula, where we deployed 3 billion soldiers across 18 systems. They're simply not built for modern warfare. Holly felt her hands clench into fists. Not built for modern warfare. Tell that to the Marines who'd held the line at Firebase Echo against odds that should have been mathematically impossible. Or the Navy crews who'd somehow managed to ram a damaged frigate into an asteroid to save a colony ship. But sure, They weren't built for modern warfare. Dr. Nathan, sitting beside her, placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Easy," he murmured. "Getting arrested for assaulting a council member probably won't help our case." Nathan was one of those rare individuals who could remain calm while watching paint dry or during a Category 5 hurricane, a trait that made him an excellent xenobiologist and an occasionally infuriating friend. His assessment reports on various alien species had helped establish humanity's first diplomatic contacts, though apparently they hadn't helped establish much respect. "The humans have submitted requests for military partnership programs," Keflix continued, scrolling through what looked like a depressingly short list. "However, given their developmental status, we recommend placement in non-combat roles. Research stations, cultural exchanges, perhaps some light manufacturing support." "Where were you thinking of placing them?" Vexara asked, her tone suggesting she was already mentally moving on to the next agenda item. Here it comes, Holly thought. The part where they stick us somewhere safe and boring, where we can't possibly cause any trouble or, heaven forbid, prove we're more capable than they think. "The Rim territories offer excellent opportunities," Thekmore said, pulling up a star chart that showed the galaxy's outer edge. "Quiet sectors, minimal conflict potential, perfect for a developing species to mature safely." The chart highlighted several systems: Meridian, Outpost Echo, Research Station Gamma, and a handful of others, all conveniently located in what Holly recognized as the galactic equivalent of suburbia, safe, predictable, and mind-numbingly dull. These positions would allow humans to contribute meaningfully while remaining protected from the more dangerous realities of galactic civilization, Keflix added. "It's really the most sensible arrangement." Engineer Phoenix, who'd been quietly studying the star chart through his tablet's connection, suddenly straightened. Holly caught his eye, and he gave her a look that said, "Pay attention to something important." Phoenix had a gift for seeing patterns others missed, a skill that had made him invaluable during humanity's early space expansion and apparently was about to become relevant again. "The hyperspace junction points," he whispered, keeping his voice low enough that the universal translators wouldn't pick it up. "Look at the hyperspace junction points." Holly pulled up her own tactical display and felt her blood run cold. Every single safe research station was positioned at a major hyperspace intersection. Not near them, not sort of close to them, right on top of them. In military terms, this was like being told you were going to summer camp and finding out the camp was built in the middle of a highway interchange. "Is there something you'd like to share with the Assembly?" Thekmore asked, his enhanced hearing apparently catching their whispered conversation. Holly stood, every inch the career military officer, despite being surrounded by beings who could probably bench press a battleship. "Just expressing our gratitude for the Assembly's consideration, General. These positions look strategically interesting." Thekmore's laugh was the kind of hearty chuckle that made you check for knives in your back. "Strategic? My dear Captain, these are the quietest, safest sectors in the galaxy. Perfect for a species that needs time to mature, without the complications of real military engagement." "Of course," Holly replied, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Wouldn't want the children playing in traffic." The Assembly proceeded to vote, a formality that involved a lot of impressive light displays and solemn nodding. Protected juvenile status. Approved. Assignment to Rim research stations. Confirmed. Military partnership applications. Deferred pending species maturity assessment. As the session concluded, and beings began filing out in order of apparent self-importance, Holly found herself staring at the star chart. Phoenix and Nathan flanked her, both wearing expressions that suggested they'd reached similar conclusions. "They're putting us in the middle of the galactic highway system," Phoenix said quietly. "Either they're complete idiots who don't understand their own hyperspace charts, or they know exactly what they're doing," Nathan finished. "The question is whether this is protection or something else entirely." Holly watched General Thekmore glad-handing other assembly members, his booming laughter echoing through the chamber. The Velthari had been running galactic military operations for 3,000 years. The odds that they'd accidentally positioned humanity's safe research stations at critical strategic points were approximately 0. "Well," Holly said, downloading the station assignments to her personal tablet, "I guess we're about to find out just how quiet and safe the Rim territories really are." As they left the chamber, none of them noticed Keflix watching their departure with an expression that might have been sympathy or anticipation. The ambassador floated there for a long moment, staring at the star chart that still displayed humanity's new homes. "Poor little cubs," they murmured to the empty chamber. "Someone should have told them that the nursery walls are made of transparent steel, and sometimes the monsters can see right through." The galaxy, as it turned out, was about to get a very expensive lesson in the difference between protecting something and underestimating it. But that realization was still a few weeks away, when the hyperspace sensors would start screaming warnings about massive fleet movements in sectors that were supposed to be perfectly safe. For now, humanity was officially protected. Safe. Supervised. What could possibly go wrong? 3 weeks after humanity's triumphant classification as protected juveniles, Captain Holly stood on the observation deck of Research Station Meridian, watching the most beautiful sunrise she'd ever seen. The local star painted the nebula beyond in shades of amber and crimson that would have made poets weep and artists throw down their brushes in defeat. It was also the last peaceful moment any of them would have for a very long time. "Captain!" Lieutenant Jamie's voice crackled through the comm system with that particular tension that meant someone was about to ruin everyone's day. "We're picking up massive hyperspace signatures on the long-range sensors. Multiple contacts, moving fast, and they're not broadcasting any identification codes." Holly sighed, watching the nebula's colors shift like oil on water. "How massive are we talking, Jamie? Cargo convoy, massive or, oh God, we're all going to die massive?" "Well, ma'am." Jamie's pause was the kind that made experienced officers reach for their emergency coffee reserves. "Remember that documentary about the Velthari Grand Fleet? The one with 300 capital ships that took 6 months to assemble?" "Yeah? This is bigger." Holly felt that familiar sensation of the universe deciding to personally inconvenience her. "Wonderful. Any idea who our unexpected visitors might be?" "Negative on identification, but the sensor profiles match Shadowkin Collective technology. And, Captain, they're not heading for any of the major systems." Now, that was interesting. The Shadowkin Collective, a cheerful hive mind species that believed galaxy-wide conquest was just good business, typically went straight for the biggest, most defended targets. It was like their signature move: find the strongest opponent, punch them in the face, assimilate their technology, repeat. "Where are they heading?" Holly asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew the answer. "Hyperspace junction points. All of them. Simultaneously." Holly closed her eyes and counted to 10. When that didn't help, she counted to 20. When that still didn't help, she decided that whoever had designed humanity's safe assignments deserved a very strongly worded letter, assuming any of them survived long enough to write it. "Alert all stations," she ordered, Switching to command frequency. This is Station Meridian calling all rim posts. We have incoming collective forces. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Repeat, we are about to have company, and they probably aren't bringing cookies. The response was immediate and depressingly familiar. Station Alpha reported similar contacts. Outpost Echo confirmed massive signatures on approach. Research Base Delta was practically buzzing with panicked chatter about the biggest fleet movement anyone had seen in decades. Dr. Nathan appeared at Holly's elbow, clutching a tablet and wearing the expression of a man who'd just solved a puzzle he really wished he hadn't. "Captain, I've been analyzing the collective's attack pattern. It's elegant, actually. Almost beautiful, if you ignore the whole galactic conquest aspect." "Enlighten me, Doctor. I could use some beauty in my life right about now." Nathan pulled up a tactical display that made Holly's stomach drop into her boots. "They're bypassing every major military installation in the sector, every single one. Instead, they're hitting the hyperspace junctions, the exact same points where we've been stationed." "Coincidence?" Holly asked, though her tone suggested she'd rather believe in fairy godmothers and lottery winnings. "The mathematical probability of this being coincidental is roughly equivalent to every atom in the galaxy spontaneously deciding to rearrange itself into a giant sculpture of General Thekmor." Phoenix wandered over, carrying what appeared to be half a sensor array, and looking entirely too cheerful for someone facing imminent doom. "Did someone mention mathematical probabilities? Because I've got some fascinating data about our defensive capabilities versus a collective assault fleet." "Please tell me it's good news," Holly said. "Well, it's definitely news." Phoenix activated his tablet, showing schematics that looked like someone had crossed a research station with a military installation and then hit the result with a hammer. "So, the good news is that our stations aren't actually research facilities." Holly blinked. "Come again?" "Look at the structural specifications. These aren't civilian installations. They're military outposts disguised as research stations. Hidden weapon emplacements, reinforced hull plating, military-grade shield generators. The works. Someone spent a lot of money making these look harmless while building them to withstand exactly the kind of assault we're about to face." The silence that followed was the kind you get when people realize they've been playing checkers while someone else was playing four-dimensional chess. "So," Holly said slowly, "the Stellar Assembly didn't just accidentally station us at strategic hyperspace junctions. They built secret military bases and staffed them with humans, knowing we'd end up as the first line of defense against exactly this kind of attack." "That would be my assessment, yes. And they did this while classifying us as juvenile non-combatants who couldn't be trusted with real military responsibilities." "Also correct." Holly looked at the tactical display, where red dots representing collective forces were steadily approaching blue dots representing human positions. "I'm starting to think General Thekmor has a very interesting definition of protected status." The comm system crackled to life, broadcasting on all frequencies. The voice that emerged was like honey poured over broken glass, beautiful, alien, and absolutely terrifying. "Attention, lesser species. This is Queen Vexahara of the Shadowkin Collective. Your galaxy has been selected for incorporation into our greater consciousness. Resistance will be catalogued, analyzed, and rendered irrelevant. Prepare for assimilation." Jamie's voice came through the internal comm. "Captain, we're receiving evacuation orders from Stellar Command. All human personnel are to withdraw immediately to designated safe zones." Holly looked at the tactical display, where those same safe zones were conspicuously located far from any hyperspace junctions or strategic positions. Convenient. Jamie, what's the status of those evacuation transports? That's interesting, Captain. According to the manifests, there aren't any. The evacuation order assumes we'll use our own ships to reach the safe zones. Phoenix snorted. Right. Our research vessels against collective interceptors. That should go well. Holly studied the display for another moment, watching the red dots creep closer to positions that definitely weren't accidentally strategic. The pieces were falling into place with the kind of clarity that usually accompanied very bad decisions. Nathan, what do we know about collective tactics? The xenobiologist pulled up his files, scrolling through data with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years studying things that could kill him. Hive mind coordination, overwhelming numerical superiority, standard doctrine based on assimilating superior technology from defeated opponents. They typically steamroll resistance through pure mass and coordination. Typically? Well, their tactics assume they're facing either individual fighters or other hive minds. They've never actually encountered a species that uses pack tactics. Holly felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that made smart people check for exits. Phoenix, how long until those collective forces reach weapons range? Approximately 4 hours, 38 minutes. Jamie, send a message to all human stations. Tell them we're not evacuating. The silence that followed was profound. Ma'am? Jamie's voice carried the careful tone of someone questioning their commanding officer's sanity. You heard me, Lieutenant. Send a message to every human position in the sector. We are not abandoning our posts. We are not running to designated safe zones. We are staying right here, and we are going to do what humans do best. Which is? Phoenix asked. Holly's smile widened, and somewhere in the galaxy, a hive mind queen was about to learn that there were worse things than facing a superior opponent. We're going to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And we're going to show the collective what happens when you mistake the cubs for the adults. The comm system buzzed with incoming responses from human stations across the sector. Not requests for clarification or demands for verification, just simple acknowledgments and requests for tactical coordination. Station Alpha. Acknowledged, Meridian. Standing ready. Outpost. Echo. Copy that, Captain. We're locked and loaded. Research Base, Delta. Understood, Meridian. Time to show them what humans can do. Holly watched the red dots on the display continue their approach toward positions that were definitely, absolutely, completely not accidentally placed at the most strategic points in the sector. Well, she said to no one in particular, this should be educational. 4 hours and 37 minutes until contact. 4 hours and 37 minutes until a hive mind that had conquered half the galaxy learned the difference between fighting individuals, fighting other hive minds, and fighting a pack. The nebula outside continued its beautiful dance of light and color, completely indifferent to the fact that it was about to witness either the greatest upset in galactic military history or the shortest battle on record. Holly was betting on the upset. The first collective ship dropped out of hyperspace exactly 4 hours and 38 minutes later, because apparently even galaxy-conquering hive minds appreciated punctuality. It was a sleek, organic-looking vessel that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent life. The kind of ship that made you think unpleasant thoughts about things that lived in deep ocean trenches. Holly watched it on the main display while sipping coffee that could probably strip paint. Well, there's our welcoming committee. Phoenix, are those hidden weapons systems online? All green, Captain. Turns out our sensor arrays are actually quite impressive particle beam projectors. And those atmospheric processors we've been maintaining? They're missile launchers. Really big missile launchers. The collective ship hung in space for a moment, probably scanning the station and wondering why a research facility had enough firepower to level a small moon. Holly could almost hear the hive mind's confusion, like a predator suddenly realizing its prey had rather more teeth than expected. "Incoming transmission," Jamie announced. "Audio only." The voice that filled the command center was different from the Queen's earlier broadcast, colder, more mechanical, like a computer trying to sound threatening. "Research Station Meridian. You will cease all activities and prepare for boarding. Resistance will result in immediate termination." Holly keyed her microphone. "Collective Vessel. This is Captain Holly commanding Station Meridian. I'm afraid we're going to have to decline your generous offer. We have a strict no assimilation policy." The pause that followed was almost comical. Holly could practically hear the collective trying to process the concept of a juvenile species refusing orders. "Your defensive capabilities are insufficient," the voice finally responded. "You cannot resist." "Well," Holly said, glancing at Phoenix, who was grinning like a maniac over his weapons console. "There's really only one way to find out, isn't there?" What happened next would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy, though most of the professors would need strong drinks before lecturing about it. The collective ship opened fire first, a standard hive mind tactic of overwhelming force designed to demonstrate futility of resistance. Massive energy beams lanced out toward the station, enough firepower to vaporize a typical research facility. Instead, they struck military-grade deflector shields that had been designed specifically to withstand exactly this kind of assault. The station shuddered but held, and Holly's coffee didn't even spill. "Phoenix," she said calmly, "I believe it's our turn." What emerged from Research Station Meridian was not the desperate, panicked response of trapped scientists. It was a precisely coordinated barrage that would have made the Velthari Grand Fleet weep with professional jealousy. Particle beams, guided missiles, and several weapon systems that Phoenix had apparently been saving as surprises turned the collective ship into an expanding cloud of very expensive debris. The silence that followed was profound. "Well," Holly said, watching the wreckage drift past the viewports, "that was easier than expected. That's when the other 63 ships dropped out of hyperspace." "Ah," Nathan observed from his position at the science console. "There's the rest of the welcoming committee." The tactical display lit up like a particularly violent Christmas tree as collective vessels spread out in perfect formation. It was the kind of coordinated movement that only a hive mind could achieve. Thousands of individual decisions made in perfect synchronization, like a deadly ballet performed by beings who had never heard the word improvisation. "Multiple contacts across all human positions," Jamie reported. "Station Alpha is engaging 12 ships. Outpost Echo has 15 contacts. Research Base Delta is looking at 20+. Holly studied the display, watching red dots swarm toward blue ones in patterns that should have been overwhelming. Should have been. The key phrase there being should have been. "Open a channel to all human." "Stations," she ordered. "Time to coordinate our response." What followed was a conversation that would have given Stellar Assembly strategists nightmares for decades. Instead of the careful, methodical planning that characterized galactic military doctrine, the humans simply talk to each other. "Echo here. We've got 15 ships moving in attack formation. Anyone got ideas?" "Delta calling in. 22 contacts on our scopes." "Nathan, what's the collective's standard assault pattern?" Nathan's voice came through clearly. They'll try to overwhelm our defenses with coordinated strikes. Textbook hive mind tactics. Perfect synchronization. Overwhelming force. Right, came Phoenix's voice from Station Alpha, where he'd been temporarily assigned. So, we don't do textbook. Holly, remember the Cygnus incident? Holly's grin was audible in her voice. The one where we jury-rigged a mining platform to take out 3 pirates? I like where this is going. What the collective encountered next was not what their strategic programming had prepared them for. Instead of meeting coordinated resistance or individual desperation, they found themselves facing something entirely outside their experience: organized chaos. Station Alpha suddenly powered down all systems, appearing to surrender. Right up until the moment 15 collective ships moved within boarding range and discovered that powered down was very different from defenseless. Hidden weapons systems tore through the formation at point-blank range. Outpost Echo did something that violated roughly 18 different articles of galactic warfare conventions by using their research equipment to create artificial gravity wells. Collective ships expecting to maneuver in normal space suddenly found themselves dealing with physics that had apparently decided to take a vacation. Research-based Delta managed to convince the collective that they were evacuating by launching what appeared to be escape pods, which turned out to be guided missiles with very impressive yield ratings. And Station Meridian. Station Meridian did something that made the collective queen herself take notice. They started talking to each other during the battle. Not the kind of precise military communication that the collective understood. Not the silent coordination of a hive mind. They were having conversations. Actual, messy, inefficient human conversations, while simultaneously orchestrating the most effective defensive action the sector had seen in decades. Holly, we've got 6 ships trying to flank from bearing 27 Mark 8. Copy that, Jamie. Phoenix, can you adjust the particle beam array to cover that approach? Already on it. Hey, Nathan, what's the structural weakness on those bioships? Analyzing now. There. The neural interface nodes are exposed during attack runs. Hit them there, and you'll disrupt their hive connection. Outstanding. Echo, you hearing this? Target the neural nodes. Echo, copies. Delta, we're about to lose formation coherence. Can you cover our 6? Delta's got you covered. Launching surprises in 3, 2, 1. The collective forces found themselves fighting an enemy that made no sense. Individual units were making independent decisions, but somehow those decisions supported a larger strategy. Communications were constant but chaotic. Tactics changed mid-battle based on real-time observations and suggestions from units that shouldn't have been able to coordinate effectively. It was like fighting smoke that had somehow learned to shoot back. Queen Vexahara's voice cut through the battle chatter, transmitted on all frequencies. This is impossible. Your coordination protocols are insufficient for this level of tactical effectiveness. Holly's response was broadcast back on the same frequency. Your Majesty, I think you're misunderstanding something fundamental here. We're not coordinating like you do, and we're not fighting like individuals. We're pack hunting. The concept hit the collective like a brick wall made of confusion and sudden realization. Pack tactics, something their hive mind had never encountered because most species either fought as individuals or as hive minds themselves. But humans fought as packs. Independent thinking coordinated through communication. Individual initiative supporting group strategy. Adaptive tactics that changed based on real-time learning from multiple perspectives simultaneously. It was everything a hive mind was not, and everything it couldn't counter. Station Alpha reporting 18 confirmed kills, came Phoenix's voice, sounding slightly out of breath. These neural node weak points are beautiful, Nathan. Echo here with 12 confirmed. Who knew gravity wells could be so much fun? Delta checking in with 15 down. We're officially out of surprise missiles, but we've got plenty of regular ones left. Holly looked at her own tactical display, where the wreckage of 23 collective ships drifted in expanding debris clouds. Meridian adds 23 to the tally. Total count? 68 confirmed kills. The pause that followed was the sound of a hive mind trying to process the impossible. You destroyed our advance force. Queen Vexahara's voice carried a note of something that might have been respect or hunger. Impressive. But this was merely a scouting mission. Our main fleet consists of over 800 vessels. 800? Holly mused. Well, that does sound like more of a challenge. Another pause, longer this time. You are not what our intelligence reports indicated, the Queen finally said. Holly's smile was sharp enough to cut through hyperspace. Your Majesty, I think that's the point. The galaxy spent so much time deciding what we couldn't do that nobody bothered to ask what we could do. And what can you do? We can fight as a pack, Your Majesty. And right now, you're in our territory. The transmission cut off, leaving the human stations alone in space with their debris fields and the growing certainty that they'd just poked a very large, very angry hive mind with a very sharp stick. Captain, Jamie's voice was carefully controlled, long-range sensors are detecting massive hyperspace signatures, much larger than the first wave. Holly looked at the tactical display, where new red dots were beginning to appear at the edge of sensor range. Lots of red dots. An impressive number of red dots. The kind of red dots that suggested the collective had decided to stop playing around. Well, she said to no one in particular, I suppose this is where things get interesting. Phoenix's voice crackled through the comm. Interesting is one word for it. Anyone got ideas for handling 800 ships with 4 research stations? Nathan's response was thoughtful. Actually, I might have some suggestions, but they're going to require us to do some things that are definitely not in any tactical manual. Holly's grin widened. Nathan, when have we ever done anything that was in a manual? Fair point, Captain. Fair point. The main collective fleet was still an hour out, giving them time to prepare for what would either be the greatest upset in galactic military history, or the shortest victory celebration on record. But before they could focus on the approaching armada, the aftermath of their first engagement provided some unexpected revelations. Captain, Nathan called out, his voice carrying that particular excitement that meant he'd found something fascinating and probably dangerous. You need to see this sensor data from the collective wreckage. Holly moved to the science station, where Nathan was displaying bioscans from the destroyed ships. The readings were unusual. These aren't just ships, Nathan explained, pointing to complex neural pathway diagrams. They're extensions of the collective itself. Each vessel contains organic components that are literally part of the hive mind's consciousness. When we destroyed them, we didn't just eliminate ships. We lobotomized pieces of their queen. Phoenix whistled low through the comm from Alpha Station. That explains why they paused so long after we wiped out the advance force. We didn't just surprise them. We hurt them. More than that, Nathan continued, pulling up additional data streams. Look at these communication patterns. The collective operates on quantum-entangled neural networks. Every ship, every drone, every individual consciousness is connected in real time. But here's the interesting part. He highlighted sections of the data that showed irregular patterns, like static, in an otherwise clear signal. Human pack tactics are creating interference in their network. Our unpredictable communication patterns, our adaptive strategies, they're generating what can only be described as cognitive noise in the hive mind. Holly felt her tactical instincts sharpening. You're saying we're not just confusing them, we're actually disrupting their ability to think clearly. Exactly. It's like trying to have a coherent thought while someone's playing jazz music directly into your brain. The more chaotic and adaptive our tactics become, the more their coordination suffers. Jamie's voice cut through their discussion. Captain, we're receiving communications from other sectors. The collective isn't just attacking the Rim territories, they're hitting major systems simultaneously. But here's what's weird. Their attacks on the core worlds are failing. Holly raised an eyebrow. Failing how? They're using standard hive mind tactics against Velthari and Naxilian forces. Perfect coordination, overwhelming numbers, textbook execution. But the core world defenses are holding because they know how to counter hive mind strategies. Meanwhile, out here, we're doing something completely different, Holly finished. And it's working. Phoenix's voice crackled through with barely contained enthusiasm. Captain, I've been thinking about those 800 ships heading our way. What if we don't try to fight them conventionally? I'm listening. The collective expects either individual resistance or coordinated defense. They've never encountered distributed pack tactics across multiple engagement zones. What if we don't stay at our stations? Nathan caught on immediately. Mobile pack hunting. Use the stations as bases, but engage the enemy in multiple theaters simultaneously. Exactly. Phoenix's excitement was infectious. We turn the entire sector into our hunting ground, force them to split their attention across dozens of simultaneous engagements, each one using different tactics. Holly studied the tactical display, seeing the possibilities unfold. Jamie, what's our mobility status? Can the stations actually move? Checking now. Jamie's fingers flew over her console. Well, this is interesting. These research stations have some very impressive propulsion systems. Hidden, of course, but capable of limited tactical movement. Define limited, Holly said. Fast enough to redeploy across the sector within the hour. Not fast enough to run away, but fast enough to be where the enemy doesn't expect us. Holly's grin was becoming positively predatory. So, we've got mobile bases, distributed tactics, and an enemy that's already suffering from cognitive interference. Nathan, what happens to a hive mind when it can't predict its opponent's behavior? Nathan pulled up xenobiological studies, scrolling through collective behavioral analysis. Hive minds rely on pattern recognition and predictive modeling. Remove predictability, and they start making increasingly desperate attempts to re-establish control. They become more aggressive, but less coordinated. So we make them angry and stupid, Phoenix summarized cheerfully. That's actually a very accurate assessment, Nathan admitted. Holly opened a channel to all human positions. All stations. This is Meridian Actual. We're about to try something that will either go down in military history as the most brilliant tactical innovation ever conceived, or the dumbest thing anyone's ever attempted. Probably both. Standing by for brilliantly stupid orders, Captain, came the response from Echo. Here's the plan. We're going mobile. Each station will redeploy to new coordinates, which I'm transmitting now. We're going to turn this sector into a maze, and we're going to hunt the collective through it like the pack predators we apparently are. The coordinates appeared on everyone's screens, positions that would turn the normally straightforward hyperspace approaches into a complex web of potential engagement zones. The goal isn't to meet their main force head-on, Holly continued. The goal is to fragment them, confuse them, and force them to fight on our terms instead of theirs. We're going to make them think like individuals instead of a collective, and that's when they'll be most vulnerable. Station Alpha was the first to move, Phoenix pushing the disguised research facility through space with surprising grace. Movement feels good, Captain. These hidden propulsion systems are actually quite responsive. Outpost Echo followed, taking position near a nebula that would provide sensor cover. Echo in position. We've got natural concealment and multiple approach vectors. Research Base Delta moved to coordinates that put them within mutual support range of both other mobile positions while maintaining independent tactical flexibility. Meridian moving to final position, Holly announced as their own station began its redeployment. 30 minutes until the collective arrives, and they're going to find a very different battlefield than they expected. As the human stations took their new positions, the tactical display showed something that had never existed before in galactic warfare. A distributed pack formation designed specifically to counter hive mind tactics. Nathan, Holly said, watching the enemy fleet's approach on long-range sensors. In your professional opinion as a xenobiologist, how do you think the collective queen is going to react when she realizes her prey has turned into the hunters? Nathan's smile was sharp and entirely unprofessional. Captain, I think she's about to get a very expensive education in human behavioral psychology. Phoenix, weapons status? All systems green across all stations. We're as ready as we'll ever be. Jamie, final countdown? Collective main force drops out of hyperspace in 15 minutes, Captain. Holly looked around the command center, at her crew preparing for a battle that should have been impossible to win. Then she looked at the tactical display, where 4 research stations had somehow turned themselves into the most dangerous pack of predators the galaxy had ever seen. Well, she said to no one in particular, this should be educational. Either way, Holly thought, it was going to be educational. 823 collective ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, expecting to find 4 terrified research stations clustered around their original coordinates. Instead, they found empty space and the lingering radiation signatures of their destroyed advance force. Queen Vexahara's voice echoed across all frequencies, carrying a note of confusion that had never existed in collective communications before. Where are they? That's when the humans struck from 4 different directions simultaneously. Station Alpha emerged from behind an asteroid field, weapons blazing. Outpost Echo materialized from the nebula's concealment, launching volleys of those delightfully illegal gravity well missiles. Research Base Delta appeared above the collective formation's plane of approach, raining destruction from an angle the hive mind hadn't considered possible. And Station Meridian? Station Meridian did something that made the Queen herself pause in disbelief. It talked to the other stations while shooting. Phoenix, nice timing on that Alpha strike. Nathan, I'm seeing weakness in their port formation. Can Echo exploit that? Already moving to position, came the cheerful response. Delta, can you provide cover fire while we maneuver? Delta's got you covered. Holly, their command ship is trying to coordinate a response. Want to discourage that? Holly's response was a precisely targeted barrage that turned the collective's command vessel into cosmic debris. Discouraged. Next target? The collective fleet found itself fighting an enemy that violated every principle of space combat they understood. The humans weren't holding formation. They were flowing around the battlefield like pack hunters circling prey. Their communications were constant but chaotic, somehow achieving coordination through what appeared to be organized confusion. Queen Vexahara watched her perfect formations begin to fragment as individual ship commanders tried to respond to threats that appeared from impossible angles, disappeared into sensor shadows, and reappeared where logic said they couldn't exist. "This is not how warfare functions," she transmitted, her voice carrying the first hint of uncertainty the collective had ever expressed. Holly's response came back immediately. "Your Majesty, that's exactly the point. We're not fighting a war. We're hunting." The distinction was more profound than the Queen initially realized. Wars were about territory, resources, strategic objectives. Hunting was about predator and prey, pack coordination, and turning your opponent's strengths into weaknesses. The humans had turned the entire sector into their hunting ground, and they were systematically taking apart a fleet that should have outnumbered them 200 to 1. "Meridian to all stations," Holly announced. "Queen's flagship identified. Big, organic-looking thing at the center of their formation. Probably thinking very hard about how this isn't going according to plan." "Echo confirms visual on target," Phoenix replied. "That thing's beautiful. Lots of neural interface nodes just begging to be shot." Nathan's voice carried scientific enthusiasm. "Those nodes aren't just communication arrays. They're the Queen's direct control interfaces. Eliminate those, and the entire hive mind network collapses." "Well then," Holly said, her smile audible across the comm channels, "I suppose we should introduce Her Majesty to human pack hunting tactics up close and personal." What followed was a coordinated assault that would be studied in military academies for centuries. 4 human stations, moving in perfect coordination without perfect communication, converged on the Queen's flagship from angles that the collective's tactical programming insisted were impossible. The Queen found herself facing enemies who thought like individuals but fought like a unified force, who made independent decisions that somehow supported a larger strategy she couldn't predict or counter. "How?" was all she managed to transmit before Station Meridian's main guns punched through her flagship's neural interface array. Holly's response was the last thing Queen Vexahara heard before her connection to the hive mind dissolved into static. "Your Majesty, you made one critical error. You assumed we were children playing at being soldiers." The silence that followed was the sound of 800 ships suddenly realizing they were no longer part of something greater. They were just individuals, alone and afraid, facing pack hunters who had just eliminated their queen. "This is Captain Holly of the Human Defense Force," Holly broadcast on all frequencies. "The hive mind is dead. You have 30 seconds to surrender or join your queen in whatever passes for collective afterlife." 29 seconds later, the largest fleet in collective history began transmitting surrender codes. 3 hours after that, General Techmore stood in the stellar assembly chamber, staring at casualty reports that made no mathematical sense whatsoever. "Let me understand this correctly," he said slowly. 4 research stations crewed by a juvenile species just eliminated the entire Shadowkin collective? Ambassador Keflix's response carried what might have been amusement. "General, I believe the correct term is apex predators. Humanity's classification has been updated." Techmore looked at the tactical recordings, where 4 impossibly small human stations had systematically dismantled a force that should have conquered half the galaxy. "The Cubs," he said quietly, "were never in the nursery at all, were they?" Keflix floated silently for a moment before responding. "General, sometimes the best way to protect your children is to teach the monsters that there are worse things in the dark than they are." In the wreckage-filled space where the collective had made their final stand, Captain Holly sat in her command chair and sipped coffee that could strip paint, watching cleanup crews catalog the debris. Well, she said to no one in particular, that was educational. Every night, Kishara admitted, I keep wondering what it says about me that I find you all strangely reassuring to have around. Ghost's grin was sharp enough to cut steel. It says you're learning, rookie. Welcome to the food chain. Songs created a soundtrack that no military strategist in the galaxy had ever planned for. And somewhere in the vastness of space, Annie Garrett was already explaining to her new computer friends about this really cool thing called the Internet, that they were definitely going to love. Burn in the cold light of distant stars. Around her, the combined fleets of the galactic community maintained perfect formation, not because they'd been forced to submit, but because they'd learned to respect the species that had saved them all. She still wore Thexakai's bones, though now they served more as a reminder than a warning. The galaxy had new apex predators, and they wore the uniforms of the species everyone had once called primitive primates. The dress code, incidentally, had been permanently revised about the strength found in diversity. They were hope made manifest in fur and fang and unshakable conviction. He'd left cubs in human care. They'd returned leading a legion of hope, all going to fight whether we want to or not. The really bad news is, our enemy doesn't believe in surrender, negotiation, or leaving survivors. Ambassador Kroon's gill slits were fluttering so rapidly they were generating small atmospheric disturbances. And the good news? Kat's smile widened, and for the first time since this whole diplomatic nightmare began, it looked genuinely warm instead of terrifying. The good news, Ambassador, is that they're about to learn why you should never underestimate a species that considers asymmetric warfare and impossible odds to be recreational activities. She gathered her materials and headed toward the exit. Briefing starts in 1 hour. Conference Room Alpha. Bring coffee. It's going to be a long war. The chamber remained silent until the massive doors sealed behind her, and then every delegate began talking at once. Outside, walking toward what was definitely not going to be her last difficult conversation of the day, Commander Kat Wolf allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Humans were officially part of the galactic community now. Time to show the universe what that really meant.